Our first, our first reading today is from Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11, and that can be found on page 78. And then the second reading is over in Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 32, and that can be found on page 1009. But back to Exodus, first of all, Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Then turning to Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 32. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. This is the word of the Lord.
Right, now we see if the technology works. Oh, looking good so far. Right, so I'm Jessica Tennant, if you don't know me. I'm one of the preaching team here, and we've now reached the fourth commandment, working backwards from the 10th. So we're doing well, folks. And you can see from here, I'm not expecting you to read it, just to say that it's the longest commandment. There's a lot in it. And I thought I had Sabbath pretty sussed, but reading through J. John's book, I've been impressed at how much I've learned about Sabbath. So I hope I'll be able to share some of it with you today. Let's look at time. Time is something that we have no real control over. We can't store it. We can't buy it. It's finite. Whatever happens, it inexorably goes on. We have just so many hours in a day, just so many days in a week, and just so many years in a lifetime. So it's incredibly precious. But in today's world, the calls on our time are vast. It's not just work, and work seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. We thought technology would make it better, didn't we? And now we've come to work and there's 100 emails to sort out before anything else. But it's also life. How do I fit my 10,000 steps in? How do I eat 30 fruit and vegetables a week? Need to keep up with my friends and my family. Need to watch that TV program that everyone's talking about. I need to read the book for book club. It just seems to go on and on, doesn't it? Now, J. John says in his book that we spend too much of our time working to pay for things we can't afford and don't need. And there's no doubt that our consumerist society is pushing us to achieve and to gain stuff. But I think there's more to it than that, because working hard isn't just about gaining stuff. It's about survival. So I've got a couple of friends I've been talking to recently. One works for the NHS and the other is in a senior teaching role, and they're both close to burnout because of the incredible pressures of their roles. And it's not that they want more stuff, they just want to do their best, but with decreasing resources, fast turnover of staff, increasing demands, life is just so difficult to them. And I was talking to one friend who is just so close to burnout at the moment that I'm not sure how they're going to go on. And then there's the other thing, that a lot of people nowadays are not spending their time working to get flash cars and TVs. They're working maybe in the gig economy, maybe on 0 hours contracts constantly, just so that they can have housing, food, warmth. So, what is Sabbath about? Well, Sabbath breaks into the busyness of our lives, and it changes things. And the first thing Sabbath does is make a statement about who rules our lives. Remembering that command with all those people who were supposed to have Sabbath, do Sabbath, everyone and all the animals, there was then the bit about God. God created the earth. God is in charge. He's the one who rules. And God says, take this day out from everything else. So it's putting God at the centre. Next, it's an opportunity to rest and become refreshed and actually become more efficient. So they've done studies and they reckon that about 30 hours is the most productive for a working week. Once you get above 50, your efficiency drops off. Once you get above 55, there's very little point to doing that work because it is so inefficient. And so Sabbath is a time when we can just chill and regenerate. It's about taking time to assess what we're doing. If we're on the treadmill, we're running so fast we can't see, but just stopping means we can say, well, did I really need to do that? Do I need to do that? It's about work not being the centre of our lives. God should be the centre of our lives, but work just takes up so much time and energy, doesn't it? That we need to stop. And if work's the centre of our lives, what happens when we retire? If we're made redundant, if we have to go on long-term sick? And it reminds us that we're defined by who we are and not what we do. If we're just defined by our jobs, I said, what happens if we lose our jobs? We are people who are in God, who are loved by God. And then finding that God will provide. Do you remember the children of Israel in the desert? And they were given manna. And every 6 days they collected manna. And if they collected it on a Monday or a Tuesday, if they tried to hoard it overnight, it went bad. But on Fridays, they collected 2 days' worth, because no manna fell on Saturdays, the Sabbath. And it didn't go bad, because God provided for them. And that's still true today. So, for example, they entertain a toy shop in town, and it's a chain all over the country. And the guy who owns that is a Christian, and he has decided that he will not open on Sundays, which is kind of a brave move, but God has been faithful. And I wonder, my friends who are close to burnout, who are working 50, 60 hours a week, if they were to make sure they had a Sabbath and not maybe sneak in a little bit of extra work, they find that God would provide the time. That's what I've always found. I found however busy I am, God will always provide the time to do what he calls me to do. But Sabbath is more than just a day, something in itself. It's part of a life lived in submission to God. And it's a life lived in the rhythms of God. God has put rhythms in our lives for a reason, not just 6 days we work, 7th we rest, but other rhythms, night and day, the seasons, when we sow and when we reap, the different stages of life. Obviously, baby, child, young adult, older adult, very old adult, different expectations, different demands, and the cycle. And then, of course, the old advert, what helps us work, rest and play? God's given us time for all those things. And on top of those, he gave the people of Israel, the people who got these commandments in the first place, 7 feast days, 7 feasts a year, which were timed. Well, there might have been a bit of repenting and a bit of sacrificing, but a lot of it was just feasting and having a party in God's name. Right? And once again, it's a cycle. It's 6 days you labour, and on the 7th you rest. And so you need to look at the 6 days as well. Work is important to God. That's what he's calling us to do. And by work, it doesn't mean going into an office or building site or whatever and working for 9 to 5 and then coming home. It means so much more than that, what God calls us to do. Homemaking, bringing up children, caring for elderly relatives, all those things that aren't paid but are just as important to God. Praying, helping people, those things. And I have to admit, I'm having to rethink my life, because when I was working, it was a case of, well, I'm doing something really important and productive every day, so that's fine. But now I'm just working one morning a week, plus all the other stuff that goes with that. It's a case of, when I have a day, how will I please God today? What am I going to do to serve God? And I know that for some of the people in the congregation, just getting out of bed and getting dressed is their work for the day, and we need to appreciate that. So for 6 days, we do stuff to please God, and on the 7th day is Sabbath. Now, there are different views on Sabbath. I think it's loosened up a bit, but when I was a younger Christian, Sabbath was taken very seriously, and there were all these things you couldn't do, and all the things that some people did and some people didn't do. And it could get quite legalistic. So it was the people that wouldn't go to the cinema on the Sabbath, or wouldn't play sports, or wouldn't watch TV. And the problem with that is people were forgetting that the Sabbath is a gift from God for us. It's something beautiful to be enjoyed, not something to be scared of. And then there's the other side. We say, well, we're living under grace now. We don't need to follow the rules, so we don't need to keep Sabbath. And once again, that's missing the point, because Sabbath is a gift from God to us for us to enjoy. So, this is something that challenged me. How to do Sabbath. I think I sort of just take it a bit for granted, really, and don't really try, but maybe we should try assembling a Sabbath. Each one of us think, how can we assemble a Sabbath? And so the first thing we need to do is prioritise it. We need to get it into our heads. God wants us to work 6 days and rest in him on the 7th. So we need to have a Sabbath day. So when should we have it? Well, obviously, the best time is Sunday, because it's church, so we can spend time with God. But that's not always possible. What about the people that work on Sundays? Another day would do. If you live in Israel, you'd probably take Saturday off as your Sabbath, because everyone else does. If you live in an Arab country, you might take Friday as your Sabbath, because that's when everything stops in the country. Nicky Gumbel's an interesting one, because I heard him talk on Sabbath once, and what he did was work 7 days a week, but he took the afternoons as his Sabbath, so he had every afternoon off, and he'd go for a bike ride or a run or something. Wouldn't suit everyone, but it worked for him. And I found when I'm busiest, I used to take evenings as Sabbath, and they were the times when I just relax. But of course, it's more difficult to fit God in then, isn't it? So if we take another day as Sabbath, it needs to be resting God, so we need to spend some time with God. For me, Wednesdays work well for Sabbath, because you can start off with praying here and you can end up with house group, so God is involved. But we need to work out for each one of us individually, if we're going to take a day's Sabbath, what's the best way of engaging with God? Do we spend time reading the Bible, meditating, I don't know, listening to some teaching? It's entirely up to us. And the next thing is that on the Sabbath we should choose activities that refresh. If walking 10,000 steps a day does not refresh your soul, don't on the Sabbath. Find something that really makes you feel good, whether it's a walk in the country, listening to music, playing PlayStation games, whatever it is for the individual. And the next one, be free. God gave us Sabbath as a gift, so we don't need to get totally knotted up inside with, is it all right to go shopping today? Is it all right to go out for a meal? Whatever it is, be free in God. I mean, each of us will have our own consciences and our own ideas of what we can and cannot do. And we should do that. But we don't need to be caught up in, we need to do this to please God, God will be cross. This is a gift. Enjoy others in your rest. How did the Jewish people start the Sabbath? Their Sabbath ran from Friday evening to Saturday evening. What did they do? What do they still do? As the famous sitcom says, Friday night dinner. They started the Sabbath by having a family meal. And I guess that's where we got Sunday lunch from. In the old days, people would go to church and then they'd come home and have Sunday lunch, which probably didn't mean much of a Sabbath for the person who cooked it, but it's all eating together, and that's important. And the next thing we need to do is stand up for Sabbath rest. And that might mean, if there's a move to change shopping hours on a Sunday so it's the same as every other day, maybe we need to campaign against that. But also when we look at our Uber drivers, our Amazon drivers, all the people in the gig economy, all those working 0 hours contracts, all those who have to work 7 days, who can't get rest just to keep going, we need to stand up against that and say people need rest. So, 2 challenges for you. First, and for me, very much for me, we need to be 7-day-a-week Christians so that in our working lives or our retired lives, we need to work out how we spend 6 days a week serving God in some sort of action. And then the other thing is start thinking about, what is our Sabbath? When are we going to take Sabbath? I mean, if I look at this week, today I had to set the alarm, which I think is something you shouldn't do on a Sabbath. Had to get to church for 9:15, practice guitar, preaching, and then this afternoon I'll have to go home and finish the prayer diary. I think I need a Sabbath next week. So I need to start thinking about, which day am I going to make my Sabbath next week and how am I going to build it? And it's the same for all of us. And we need to take this seriously. So, something for you to take home and think about.